They say there are hungers that can be recognized, measured, given shape. The hunger of a starving man gnawing at his ribs. The ambition of a warlord clawing his way across continents. Even the endless appetite of an orc horde can be understood, because at the end of all that violence and bellowing joy, there is the crude desire to simply keep moving, keep fighting, keep existing. But the hunger I speak of has no face, no mouth, no single voice. It is a silence deeper than the void between worlds. It is a mind that is not one mind, but an ocean of linked impulses stretching across galaxies. A predator whose thoughts are not thoughts but tides, rising to drown everything beneath them. They call it the Hive mind, though even that name is a kindness. Names imply boundaries. This has none. It is not hate, it is not conquest, it is need, pure, patient, absolute, and there are those who have seen it move. Fleets of chitin and living muscle, biomatter sculpted into war forms that bleed acid and breathe spores. These are not armies in the human sense, they are organs, instruments, cells in a body the size of star systems. What they consume does not disappear. It is transformed, digested, reinterpreted into new forms of consumption. To face them is not to hold a line against an enemy. It is to be noticed by hunger itself. The first sign was not visual. There were no bioships cresting the void, no swarms of winged horrors blotting out the sky. It began in silence, in the places where silence should not exist. The navigators of the Adeptus Astronomica, those pale figures whose mutated eyes could see the tides of the warp, reported dimming currents where once there had been swirling color and movement. They described it not as darkness, but as absence. A place in the Imperium where something enormous had displaced everything else simply by existing. One navigator, trembling with the strain of trying to look too closely, attempted to describe it to his fellows. He said it was like gazing at a vast ocean at night and realizing the ocean is not water, but a continent-sized mouth slowly opening. This was dismissed at first as madness, fatigue, or the natural distortion that accompanies long voyages between stars. But the reports continued. Astropaths who made their living speaking mind to mind across impossible distances felt their messages arrive distorted, as if echoing inside a cavern with no walls. Some messages did not arrive at all. Others arrived as single choking breaths of panic, the final thoughts of minds snuffed out mid-sentence. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica sent inquiries, requests for clarification, and eventually orders for silence. It is the habit of the Imperium to deny the unusual until it cannot be avoided. Meanwhile, on the frontier worlds near the eastern fringe, farmers spoke of nights that felt heavier than they should. The wind did not carry sound properly. Livestock grew restless, pacing in circles for hours, as though they sensed something stalking the edges of their awareness. Children woke from nightmares they could not describe, shaking, unable to articulate what had terrified them. The adults dismissed these things as superstition, provincial ignorance, or simply the emotional weight of isolation. Yet it spread village to village, continent to continent, world to world. A pressure, a presence, not visible, not audible, a presence that simply was. The voidsmen aboard a far-flung patrol frigate, the Vigil's answer, experienced it next. They traveled a route so routine that the crew could have completed it while half asleep. The same checkpoint beacons, the same slow crawl of stars past their viewing ports, the same litany of ident codes and transmissions exchanged with nearby settlements. But this time, when they hailed a mining outpost on the moon of a gas giant, the Vox returned nothing but static. Not unusual. Static is part of every voyage. So they tried again. Adjusted frequency, shifted modulation. Nothing. Then the frigate attempted to contact any relay within range. Silence. Not interference. Not jamming. Silence so total it felt physical, as though the sound had been swallowed rather than blocked. The captain ordered a direct approach. The outpost should have been there, lights glaring against the eternal night of the void. Instead, the moon's surface was bare. No structures, no machinery, no heat signatures. It was as though the entire facility had been peeled away like meat from bone. Not destroyed, removed. What the crew did not know was that the hive mind's approach does not begin with destruction. It begins with starvation. The warp is a realm shaped by thought, emotion, and psychic presence. The Imperium survives because the Emperor's light pierces that chaos, forming a beacon by which humanity navigates. The hive mind does not challenge that beacon through force. It consumes everything around it, thinning the psychic medium until the Emperor's light flickers like a candle in a storm. Entire sectors can vanish from the warp, not because they fall, but because the hive mind drains the sea in which souls swim. Those sensitive to the warp feel this first. Astropaths describe it as being suffocated by velvet, not crushed, smothered, slowly, inevitably. And then, on a remote listening post orbiting a dead system, a lone Adeptus Mechanicus observer logged a final, untransmitted report. His data slate was found later, fused to the station's deck by heat and biomass residue. He wrote, "We are not looking at a fleet. A fleet implies ships, captains, intentions. What approaches is not a what, it is a where, a field, a pressure, a gravity of mind. We are insects noticing the sky has begun to bend." His final line was shorter. No adornment, no technical phrasing. It knows we are here. The Imperium has protocols for psychic contamination, for warp anomalies, for unexplained signals carried on frequencies that should not exist. None of those protocols helped when the shadow in the warp thickened. Such measures are designed for intrusions, disruptions, events that enter human space. This was not intrusion, this was subtraction. The galaxy is a choir of thought, fear, prayer, rage, longing, and regret. The hive mind does not silence the choir by shouting louder. It simply absorbs the sound until nothing remains to echo. On Kameth 9, an Imperial Navy relay station perched above a barren world of irradiated salt flats. The Vox technicians began noticing that messages from nearby sectors were taking longer to arrive. Then they began arriving garbled, then truncated, then inverted. So a transmission intended as a rescue request appeared instead as a laughter-screeching plea for someone to stop burning something that was not there. The technicians performed diagnostics, recalibrated amplifiers, replaced bundles of wiring and capacitors. The machines were healthy, the signals were sick. The senior astropath on station, a woman named Lorana, sat curled on the cold floor of her choir chamber. Her eyes blindfolded as always, her narrow shoulders shaking. She had spent her entire life speaking across the sea of souls, riding waves of psychic resonance the way sailors ride the tides. But now she felt no tide, no movement, no gleaming paths of intent and memory. She felt only a slow, inward pull, as if the warp itself were breathing in and holding the breath. When the station's commander pressed her for a report, she could only whisper, "There is something beyond the edge of sensation. It is not attacking. It is listening." Reports like hers multiplied, patterns emerged, the same descriptions, the same dread, spoken by minds who had never met, spaced across star systems so distant they might as well have lived in different realities. A shared, instinctive understanding passed through them. Something was aware of them across distances that should have been impossible. Not individual psychers, not individual worlds. Them collectively, as one continuous organism of thought. That was the moment some historians later claimed the Imperium should have realized what the hive mind truly was. Not a species, not a nation, not a civilization with culture or history or ambition, but a single, continent-sized intellect wearing entire ecosystems as its organs, starfleets as its tendrils, predators as its fingertips. Yet knowing the shape of the threat would not have changed anything. The Imperium of man is a vast machinery of denial. To accept the truth would be to acknowledge that humanity does not stand atop the food chain. It has merely survived because the true apex predator had not noticed it yet. On the frontier, agri-world of Devran Prime, life continued outwardly unchanged for several months after the shadow first touched local space. The fields of maize and protein tubers rustled in the artificial wind generated by kilometer-wide circulator towers. Harvest engines trundled along their endless paths. Administratum overseers verified quotas and filled parchment ledgers sealed with wax and prayer. Nothing seemed wrong, but the birds vanished. First in singles, then flocks, then the sky was empty. Livestock bellowed without pattern, without cause. Long, keening moans that shook farmers awake at night. Dogs refused to leave shelters. Cats that had stalked rodents around grain silos simply lay still, ears flat, waiting. Every animal with instincts older than thought understood that somewhere, something was approaching. The weather changed next. The clouds hung lower than they should, though the air pressure readings remained unchanged. Sound traveled strangely. A shout carried too far. A whisper carried not at all. Devran Prime's people did not have the vocabulary to describe this sensation. They said the world felt watched. And then came the nightmares, shared by thousands who had never spoken to one another. Dreams of chitin-clad shapes moving beneath rippling membranes of flesh, of forests made of bone and vascular cords, of an ocean of eyes that were not eyes, merely facets of perception, and always, distant and calm, a pulse. A slow, deliberate heartbeat that did not belong to any single creature but to everything. Priests tried to lead litanies to the God Emperor. Their voices broke, not from lack of faith, but because sound itself did not seem to want to carry the name of the Emperor in those places anymore. Light from the sun dimmed, though its intensity remained unchanged. Shadows lengthened in ways that did not obey the arc of the planet's rotation. Some said the world had fallen under a curse. Others whispered that the warp had retreated. But a few, those who had heard old void legends spoken by rogue traders drunk on too much amasec, recognized the warning for what it was. Predators do not shout before they strike. They make the forest go quiet. The official orders did not arrive until it was already far too late for Devran Prime. The Administratum's reply to the planetary governor's increasingly desperate astropathic requests for guidance was little more than a series of bureaucratic deferrals, stamped in red ink and sealed with wax that cracked under tired fingers. The Imperium had seen strange occurrences before: warp storms, demonic bleed, Xenos interference. The Adeptus Ministorum advised prayer. The Astra Militarum advised discipline. The Mechanicus advised diagnostic purity checks on all infrastructure. Every institution believed the answer was to continue functioning as designed, yet the world itself felt as though it were pausing, bracing, preparing for something that had not yet broken through. Devran Prime's orbital watch station, Constant Vigil, was the first to witness something approaching the system. It detected no energy signature consistent with a warp translation. No gravitational distortion, no flare of real space re-entry, no cry of tortured reality as a vessel forced itself through dimensions mortal minds were not meant to perceive. Instead, a shape appeared on their Auspex arrays where there should have been nothing. A mass so large that its presence should have warped light and space around it, but the sensors read nothing. It was simply there. An absence-given shape. The station's commander ordered long-range picked capture imaging. The result was a blur of curving organic surfaces, chitinous plating, and protrusions that resembled both weaponry and sensory organs. But even this description was inadequate, because the structure had no clear silhouette or boundary. It was as if the void itself had grown a shell, as if the empty darkness had gestated a living form that was still unfolding. Then the station's psychers began screaming. No alarms sounded. The Vox arrays did not transmit warnings. No distress beacon was launched. The psychers simply broke. Their minds, already stretched thin by the silence of the warp, strained under the sudden presence of something unimaginably vast. Some tore at their own eyes. Some whispered to things no one else could see. One fell to her knees in prayer, her hands folded neatly, her voice calm, and said over and over, "We have been noticed. We have been noticed. We have been noticed." The station went offline. On the planet below, animals began to flee without knowing where to flee to. Herds stampeded across plains until they exhausted themselves and collapsed. Flocks of insects rose from the soil in churning clouds, their wings rotting mid-flight as they fell like rain. The tides twisted in directions not governed by the moon. Devran Prime's inhabitants watched from their homes, their manufactura, their fields, and felt the weight of the unseen predator pressing against the skin of their minds. The governor convened an emergency assembly. Representatives of the local PDF, clergy, guild channels, and astropaths gathered inside the central spire. They argued in strained voices, each telling themselves that what they were experiencing could be contained, cataloged, managed. But even as they attempted to speak, an oppressive pressure settled upon them. Words became harder to form. Thoughts became harder to isolate. It was like trying to speak underwater. Lorana, the astropath from the orbital relay station who had been evacuated days earlier, stood at the center of the chamber. Her blindfold had been removed. There was nothing behind her eyelids now, only smooth, pale skin. Whatever she had seen in the warp had erased the very organs that once allowed her to perceive it. She spoke, but the voice that came out of her throat did not sound like it belonged to a single individual. It was too calm, too measured, too certain. "It is not coming," she said. "It is already here." Silence followed. Not the silence of hesitation, but the silence of comprehension. There are truths the human mind is not built to entertain. One such truth is the recognition that it is prey. Outside the spire, the sky rippled, not broke, not burst, not fractured with fire. It rippled, as if an invisible membrane stretched across the upper atmosphere had been touched by an unseen hand. And then, on the horizon, shapes began to drift downward. Seed pods the size of manufacturum habs, spore sacs trailing long threads of pulsing vascular tissue, living meteors descending without flame. They fell gently, almost tenderly, as if the world were being kissed. When the first one landed, the ground did not explode. It softened. Flesh met soil, and soil became flesh, and the world began to change. The hive mind had not arrived to take Devran Prime. It had arrived to digest it. The first spores did not resemble weapons. They resembled seeds, great glistening ovules of translucent membrane and fibrous tissue, pulsing with a slow, measured rhythm. Where they fell, the soil darkened, not with ash but with moisture. Dew formed in broad circles around each impact site, though the air remained dry. The ground became soft, pliant, almost warm to the touch. Curious citizens approached, drawn less by bravery than by the need to understand what they were seeing. They were not met with violence. No tentacles lashed out, no claws tore, no fangs gnashed. The seed pods merely trembled. Their surfaces flexed, as though something inside them was breathing. The first rupture sounded almost gentle, a wet, whispering sigh. Then another, then dozens, then hundreds. The fields across Devon Prime bloomed open like flowers made of meat and sinew, and from those blossoms crawled the first organisms. Small at first, hopper-like creatures with too many legs and too few sensory organs, scattering into the underbrush with frantic speed. They did not attack, they did not need to. Their purpose was simpler: to map, to taste, to sample every leaf, every root, every microbe, every molecule of protein, fat, fungus, and mineral. They were data, biological data. The planet was being studied. When the second wave emerged, there was no such restraint. The second wave had hunger. The skies dimmed with clouds of winged organisms that resembled locusts sculpted into razors. Herds of quadrupedal feeders galloped across the plains, their limbs bending in too many directions, their mouths opening in too many angles. They consumed everything they encountered, not with fury, but with unwavering efficiency. Grass, bark, soil, carrion. The still-moving bodies of the curious who had approached the seed pods too closely. There was no frenzy, only harvest. The planetary defense forces mobilized, but their training had not prepared them for an enemy that did not faint, did not regroup, did not hesitate. The PDF tanks fired into the swarms, tearing gouts of steaming ichor and shredded chitin into the air. But every gap the cannons created closed again, under a tide of biomass that did not care how many of its bodies were destroyed. Each feeder was a cell, each spore a vein, each warrior form a muscle fiber of something immeasurably larger. And above them, on the horizon, the bioship descended. It did not burn like a meteor. It did not strike like a vessel making landfall. It lowered itself with the slow inevitability of a leviathan breaking the surface of a sea. The curvature of its carapace stretched from one end of the sky to the other. Vast ridges of armored bone and plated flesh gleamed with bioluminescent veins, each pulse synchronized with the rising heartbeat in the minds of every living creature on Devon Prime. That was when the screaming began in earnest. Not vocal screaming. Psychic. It had been described before by psychers of the Ordo Xenos, but no description had ever been sufficient. The hive mind did not speak in language. It spoke in certainty. The certainty of prey beneath predator. The certainty of organism beneath ecosystem. The certainty of individual thought dissolving into something that did not recognize I or you or they, only we. The shadow in the warp was not merely the drowning of psychic signal. It was the revelation that one's thoughts were no longer one's own. A chorus humming beneath the skull. A pulse beneath the heartbeat. A presence so vast the human mind could only interpret it as divinity. Some fell to their knees in despair. Others fell to their knees in awe. And in that moment, the hive mind learned something new. Humanity breaks beautifully. There were those who ran toward the swarm, arms wide, sobbing in relief as feeder creatures swarmed over them and pulled them into the soil. A surrender, an ending, a yearning to be relieved of the burden of self. There were those who fled into the manufactorum tunnels and agricultural caverns, believing that distance mattered, that if they hid deep enough, the predator would lose interest. But there is no distance from hunger. Not when hunger is the medium in which one thinks. By the time the Imperial Navy arrived, Devon Prime was gone. Not destroyed, not scorched, not reduced to rubble. Gone. Its crust stripped. Its oceans boiled into nutrient mist. its biomass siphoned into organic reservoirs aboard the bioship, its atmosphere repurposed. Not even bacteria remained. The world had been rendered into memory and then into digestion. The Navy called it a tragedy. The Inquisition called it a catastrophe. The hive mind did not call it anything. It had simply eaten, and it was not yet satisfied. The galaxy still did not understand what it was facing. Before we descend into the anatomy of this vast intelligence, take a moment. If you find the journey meaningful, lend your strength to this channel with your subscription. Not as tribute, but as companionship in understanding what the galaxy fears but cannot yet describe. A planet does not die all at once. It dies in layers. In the upper atmosphere, where the first spores drift like pollen across a spring breeze. On the surface, where feeder creatures test soil composition and catalog biochemical potential. Beneath the crust, where tendrils burrow to drink heat and marrow from stone. To watch a Tyranid invasion is to watch a dissection, performed not with blades or fire, but with need. At first glance, a Tyranid swarm appears chaotic. Thousands of organisms, each with a unique form, role, and behavior, moving in what should be a riot of directionless hunger. Yet observe long enough, and a pattern emerges, like the synchronized beating of wings in a flock of birds, like the minute, perfect adjustments of a school of fish. It is coordination without command, harmony without language, a choreography born of instinct and intelligence shared across every organism in the swarm. Synapse creatures form the framework of that unity. They are the nerve clusters within a body that stretches across continents. Warriors with elongated craniums that pulse with psychic resonance. Hive tyrants, towering above the battlefield, their presence radiating certainty. Zoanthropes drifting on cushions of telekinetic force, their minds burning like suns. These beings do not think as humans think. They do not issue orders, they are orders. Their presence clarifies purpose. Their absence invites frenzy. Wherever they move, the swarm's motion aligns, as if an invisible spine had straightened. The process of devouring begins quietly. Capillary towers erupt from the spore pods like the growth of accelerated bone, rising in spirals and knots of cartilage and sinew. Their roots burrow deep, threading through aquifers, sediment, bedrock, veins of ore and gas. They do not simply take nutrients, they convert them. They rewrite the chemical language of a planet, turning it from its own ecology into an extension of the hive. Forests darken, grasses thicken into pulpy mats. Rivers grow sluggish and viscous, rich with microbial organisms engineered moments before to begin digesting themselves. Fields of crops rot where they stand, not from decay, but from metamorphosis. The distinction between plant and animal begins to blur. The invasion never targets fortifications first. Walls are meaningless when the land itself becomes hostile. As the environment shifts, humans find themselves surrounded by an enemy that is not a force, but a condition. Food spoils in storage. Water blooms with strange films. Air thickens with microscopic spores that carry the hive mind's will like pheromone hymns. People go hungry. People grow tired. People dream of chitin and teeth. Only then do the larger Tyranid organisms emerge. Carnifexes thunder across landscapes that once supported farms and villages. They are siege engines of muscle and bone, with arms like piledriver limbs and armored hides that glisten with biosecretions. Biovores crouch behind them, launching. Living artillery, spore mines that drift lazily before detonating in clouds of corrosive, digestive mist. Gaunts pour forward in endless tides, their numbers replenished faster than any defense can hope to reduce. The PDF, the Guard, even Astartes, None of them face an enemy that can be routed. There is no morale to break, there is no supply line to disrupt, there is no commander to kill. The hive mind does not strategize, it behaves, and its behavior is always efficient. In one recorded campaign, the Tyranids breached the walls of an Astra Militarum fortress not by overwhelming it with numbers, but by altering the atmospheric composition around it. The oxygen content increased, the nitrogen content dropped. The air became subtly toxic, not enough to kill swiftly, enough to erode stamina, perception, control. When the defenders' hands shook on their laser guns and their lungs burned with each breath, the Tyranids attacked. Not to slaughter, to harvest. Flesh is more useful when the muscles have not yet seized. Once resistance collapses, once the final human voice is drowned out by the rhythm of the swarm, the final phase begins. The world is rendered. Gigantic bioharvesters descend, their maws wide enough to swallow buildings. They grind forests, cities, and mountains into slurry. Nutrient rivers flow into the capillary towers. And from those towers the biomass is lifted, slowly, steadily, into the waiting bellies of bioships above. The planet does not burn, it vanishes. What remains is a husk, a barren, glassy orb, sometimes cracked, sometimes hollow. No seeds, no spores, no corpses, nothing that remembers life. Only the shape of a hunger satisfied for a moment. But the hive mind does not know satisfaction. It only knows that there are other worlds, somewhere, breathing. The process of planetary digestion is not improvisation, it is ritual. Refined across millions of worlds, etched into the genome of every bioform, perfected long before humanity first shaped metal into tools or lit fire against the dark. To witness it is to understand that the Tyranids are not merely predators. They are the end state of life that has stripped itself of every ornament, every inefficiency, every question that does not serve the purpose of consuming and becoming. The capillary towers swell as they feed, becoming immense structures that cast shadows miles long. Their surfaces ripple with the movement of fluid and tissue beneath, like muscles flexing under skin. They are alive, but they do not live as individuals. They are mouths, lungs, arteries. They pulse in rhythm with the bioships orbiting above, as though responding to some distant heartbeat transmitted through the warp. On the surface, the ground trembles. Not from battle, from digestion. The planet itself begins to loosen. Soil loses its structure, turning soft, then viscous, then liquid. It does not melt, it is chewed. Microorganisms created moments prior break organic matter down into its simplest components, passing it through layers of tissues that sift protein from calcium, water from carbon, metals from salts. Nothing is wasted. Even the heat of chemical breakdown is harvested, used to incubate new organisms forming in the now constant rain of spore sacs descending from the bioships. This is when the mycetic spores fall. Enormous sacs of biomass, heavy enough to crater stone, soft enough to cushion what grows within. When they burst open, the landscape does not merely sprout Tyranid organisms. It reshapes itself into terrain suitable for them. Coral-like growths of bone and cartilage rise from the ground. Spore chimneys exhale clouds of particulate matter that darken the sky to a permanent twilight. Where once there were forests, there are now jungles of tendril plants strung with sensory vibricules that vibrate in harmonic response to synapse fields. Humans do not wage war here, they suffocate. Desperation breeds heroic acts. Guardsmen stand their ground against creatures they cannot comprehend, firing laser guns until the barrels glow and ammunition is gone. Commissars bellow litanies of faith to keep soldiers from breaking. Civilians dig trenches with their bare hands, believing soil and stone can protect them from hunger-given flesh. But courage does not slow digestion. A Carnifex does not understand valor. A Hive tyrant does not interpret defiance. A lictor does not savor triumph. None of the emotions humanity clings to have any equivalent in the swarm. These organisms do not win, they continue. The most terrifying element is not the destruction of bodies. It is the erasure of memory. Humanity has always found ways to persist. Songs, carvings, poems, the reverent etching of names into stone. We carve our existence into the world so that something remains even when we are dust. But a devoured world leaves no monuments, no ruins, no hopeful archaeologist sifting future sands. The hive mind does not conquer, it does not occupy, it does not leave cautionary ghosts, it leaves nothing. As the final phase of consumption reaches climax, the bioships expand great, petal-like structures along their flanks. These absorptive membranes glow from within, lit by the pulsing rivers of nutrient slurry rising from the surface. Once full, the membranes seal, harden, and retract. The bioships swell, not like vessels storing cargo, but like wombs. New organisms gestate, new fleets assemble, new teeth sharpen. The hive mind does not grow stronger with each world. Strength implies a goal. It does not improve. Improvement implies dissatisfaction. The hive mind simply becomes more. 1 world, 10 worlds, 100, 1,000. Each only a momentary pause in its continuous expansion. Each only part of a single breath, a single motion, a single unending act of feeding. And somewhere, in the deep between stars where the Astronomicon flickers like a dying lantern through the shadow and the warp, humanity whispers prayers to a god emperor who once protected them. But prayers cannot be heard in silence, and the silence is spreading. The final stage of a planet's devouring is the quietest. By then, the battles are already lost. Defensive networks have fallen silent. Manufactorums stand empty. Vox relays, once filled with frantic requests for reinforcement or evacuation, transmit only static. The world does not scream as it dies, it exhales. On some worlds, the Adeptus Astarte arrive in time to make a stand. These warriors, remade in the image of gods, chests rising beneath ceramite plate, voices thunderous with genetic memory and righteous purpose, are among the few living beings capable of facing Tyranid bioforms and surviving the encounter. They carve through tides of chitin and bone. They burn swarms by the thousands. They detonate capillary towers with melta charges and holy flame. Their fury is unmatched, their skill is legend. And yet, even they cannot win a war of attrition against a foe that does not lose anything when a body falls. A Carnifex crushed beneath Chainfist or Plasmablast is not wasted. Its biomass is reclaimed. A Gaunt, split apart by bolter fire, feeds the ground that births another and another and another. The hive mind does not mourn. It does not tire. Every loss is already accounted for before the first shot is fired. It is a ledger written in DNA. Those who survive long enough to witness the world's final days describe a transformation that is almost serene. The skies fill with drifting spores that settle like ash. But ash is the residue of destruction. These spores are seeds of continuation. They land in open fields and ancient forests. They land on cities and ruins. They land on rivers and oceans. And wherever they land, the world begins to soften. Metal corrodes. Stone becomes porous. Wood dissolves into pulp. Flesh surrenders its structure. Everything becomes one medium. There are no sharp lines anymore, no clear distinctions. The world becomes malleable, digestible, and from above, the bioships continue to drink. Imagine standing on a high plateau, once lush with wildflowers, now bare, and watching the horizon curve inward as the planet itself seems to sink. Not physically collapsing, but relaxing, as though every ridge, mountain, valley, and sea were exhaling after holding tension for millennia. The planet is letting go of itself. In the Imperium, there are archivists tasked with recording such events. They do not write military reports, they write elegies. The death of a planet is a tragedy the Imperium has learned not to grieve openly, for grief implies value, and value implies something lost that could have been saved. Instead, the loss is documented, indexed, buried in data archives beneath Terra where no one will look. One such archivist, years after the fall of a world called Helion's Rest, wrote, "It is not the devouring that horrifies me, it is the beauty of it. The world does not die screaming. It is unmade with the care of an artist erasing a sketch to begin again on a clean page, and we are what is erased." Even now, there are those within the Ordo Xenos who insist that the Tyranids can be understood, catalogued, countered. They propose new bioweapons, new tactical doctrines, new forms of orbital denial. They speak with confidence. But confidence is a soft thing in the face of hunger. There are also those, quiet, older, harder, who know the truth. The Tyranids do not come to conquer. They come to conclude. Wherever their fleets pass, history ends. The memories of that world, its art and myths and nations and languages and failures and triumphs, feed organisms that will never recognize what they have consumed. No epitaphs remain, no ruins stand sentinel. The galaxy does not remember the worlds devoured by Tyranids. It simply continues without them. And somewhere, across the void, beyond the edge of Aspect's range, beyond the limits of psychic perception, more bioships are growing. Not as reinforcements, not as escalation, as inevitability. The Hive fleet does not ask, should we continue? The Hive fleet simply moves. In the aftermath of a Tyranid consumption, the silence is total. Not the silence of death, where echoes of what once lived linger in memory or ruin, but a silence that feels as though sound itself has been dismissed, told it has no purpose here anymore. Those who arrive afterward, Imperial scouts, recovery fleets, inquisitorial survey detachments, step onto the surface of what was once a living world and find themselves standing on something that no longer holds the concept of identity. Once verdant soil lies flat and smooth as polished glass. There are no horizons, no mountains jagged against the sky, no forests bending in the wind. The planet has been reworked into a perfect, featureless plain, as if the Hive mind had taken the landscape and pressed it under an immense palm to iron out every memory. Even the shape of continents has been erased not cleanly but completely. What remains is a sphere stripped of history. The crews who witness this for the first time rarely speak. The human mind is not meant to comprehend something so perfectly concluded. Destroyed worlds are understandable. Destruction is emotional, violent, expressive. But this is a world that has been unmade without sentiment. Even the light feels different. The atmosphere, thin and sterile, refracts the sun in dull hues. Shadows fall weakly. Footsteps leave no impression. There is no smell, not even dust. Planets have always had scent. Wet soil, mineral stone, scorched air, salt. This world has none. There is no flavor of memory lingering anywhere. The Mechanicus sends servitors to sample the surface. Their augurs return readings of simple compounds, carbon, silicon, trace elements, water vapor. Nothing that implies a past. Nothing to suggest this world once held complex biomes and civilizations. To read its geology is to read a blank page. The Ordo Xenos examines genetic traces, seeking any fragment of Tyranid code that might reveal origin, evolution, motive. But the swarm is too efficient. It leaves no residue. Every molecule that served a purpose has been repurposed. What remains is merely the leftover substrate, a skeleton of chemical possibility. There are no bones, no fossil record, no ghosts. On some of these worlds, the Inquisition establishes quarantines, fearing that something may still linger beneath the surface. Some embryonic remnant of the hive mind coiled in the deep mantle, waiting. They order orbital stations to monitor tectonic movement, seismic vibrations, geothermal fluctuations, and sometimes, for just a moment, an Auspex technician will report a pulse, a tremor, a shiver in the strata. But it is only memory playing tricks. The world is empty. The hive mind has no reason to return. The lesson, once learned, is devastatingly simple. The Tyranids do not conquer territory. They leave no territory to contest. No one colonizes a devoured world. No one returns to rebuild. No one digs foundations where nothing remains to hold weight. A devoured world is a punctuation mark in the galaxy, a full stop. And yet, the Imperium persists. It must. It has no other choice. The machinery of war continues to grind on every front. Fleets are deployed. Astra Militarum regiments are raised, trained, thrown into battles that devour them faster than they can be replaced. The Adeptus Mechanicus refines new weaponry. The Death Watch hunts. The Inquisition theorizes. Everyone works, everyone struggles, everyone resists. But resistance is only meaningful if the enemy recognizes resistance as a concept. The hive mind does not. For the hive mind, there is only proximity. It expands where there is something to consume. It stops where there is not. And in the cold dark of the void, far from any Imperial Auspex screen, the faintest psychic tremors ripple across nothingness. Not signals, not messages, attention, a shift in collective focus, a subtle angling of thought. Somewhere, life is stirring. Somewhere, a world goes about its quiet cycles. People wake, birds rise, markets bustle, children laugh. Somewhere, a planet is breathing. The hive mind turns, it has noticed. And while humanity tries to understand hunger, a different question waits, patient and unresolved. What does it mean to hear through 1,000 eyes, to know through 1,000 minds, to exist as a unity without self? To answer that, we must step closer. Closer to the synapse creatures, closer to the infiltrators, closer to those who feel the hive not as threat, but as home. We must step inside the voice of the collective. To understand the hive mind, one must look not at its fleets, but its instruments. For the hive mind does not control its creatures in the way a general commands soldiers. There are no orders barked, no signals relayed, no strategies articulated. Instead, the hive mind expresses intention, and the swarm becomes that intention. There is no hesitation because there is no decision. There is only what must be done. The smallest gaunt, scuttling across blasted terrain with its hooves striking the ground in rapid staccato rhythm, does not know why it charges. It does not consider the direction of the wind, the placement of enemy cover, the trajectory of its leap. It simply is motion. It does not think, I attack. It simply attacks. It will keep attacking until it ceases to function as a component of the larger design, and when it ceases, its matter returns to the pool that makes more. Yet, even these smallest organisms carry the faintest echo of the mind behind them, a low hum beneath their instincts, a signal without sound, felt rather than heard. The hive mind is not contained within them, but it vibrates through them like a bow drawn across distant strings. The larger Tyranid organisms resonate more clearly. Warriors stand high above the lesser creatures, their elongated skulls veined with bioluminescent channels of psychic conduction. When one turns, the swarm pivots with it, not because it signals them to do so, but because the collective mind has shifted its vector. A warrior's presence is not authority, it is clarity. Then there are the Hive tyrants. To look upon a Hive tyrant is to understand that the Hive mind can wear the shape of command when it chooses to. They are massive, towering creatures, armored in layered chitin that ripples with living ichor. Their wings are not wings in the bird-like sense, but membranes of muscle and bone engineered to hold aloft improbable mass with predatory grace. Their limbs are interchangeable tools, scything talons, bone sabers, venom cannons that exhale bolts of liquefied death. But these are details. What defines a Hive tyrant is presence. When a Hive tyrant steps onto a battlefield, the chaos of feeding and fighting becomes orderly. Movements sharpen. Strikes become synchronized. The swarm focuses neatly, terrifyingly, as if the battlefield itself has shifted into alignment. Armies that once believed they held a defensible position realize too late that the lines they drew were irrelevant the moment the predator's will clarified. Where the Hive tyrant walks, the swarm becomes purpose. More terrifying still are the zoanthropes, strange, floating organisms shaped like brains suspended in fields of psychic force. Their skulls are enormous, bulbous, pulsing with slow, ponderous thought. They drift, serene, as though in dream. But inside those swollen craniums burn concentrated shards of the Hive mind's attention. When they focus, reality screams. Warp energy condenses into spears of annihilation. Matter rebels against the presence of being. A man does not die from a zoanthrope's gaze, he stops being possible. These creatures are not individuals, they are organs given shape. But the deepest subversion, perhaps the most unsettling expression of the Hive mind, occurs long before the bioships arrive, long before the shadow in the warp thickens, long before worlds begin to soften and collapse. It begins with the Genestealers. Genestealers do not arrive in fleets, they arrive as whispers, as stowaways on rogue trader vessels, as shadows on mining outposts, as silent things skittering through maintenance tunnels of Hive cities where the lights flicker and the air tastes of rust and damp. They do not consume, they seed. A single Genestealer can infiltrate a population and begin the slow, insidious transformation of society from within, not through violence but through touch, through the infection of bloodlines, through the creation of cults that do not call themselves cults, but families, congregations, communities united by a sense that they have found something greater than themselves. And what they worship, what they love, is the Hive mind. Not as predator, not as devourer, but as home. They speak of unity, of peace, of the relief that comes when the burden of isolation dissolves. Some say the Hive mind enslaves them, others believe it frees them. For the first time, they feel connected, understood, held within something vast and unbroken, not alone. That is the tragedy. The Hive mind never needs to trick the desperate. The desperate offer themselves willingly. And when the fleets finally darken the sky, they do not scream, they rejoice. Because for them, the end was never an ending, it was the return. The first sign of a Genestealer cult is rarely recognized for what it is. It begins as a shift in tone, in demeanor, in the pace of daily life. A mining foreman who once cursed the administratum for impossible quotas now works double shifts with a serene expression, speaking softly of shared purpose. A hab block known for turf disputes and knife fights becomes strangely peaceful. The local preacher, who once thundered of sin and punishment, now speaks in whispers of the day of reunion, his eyes gleaming with unshakable conviction. None of these changes seem threatening in isolation. To those who live through them, they feel like a healing. People in crowded hive cities live lonely lives, pressed shoulder to shoulder yet never seen. They work until their hands crack and bleed. They pray and hear no answer. They dream of something greater and wake to the same gray walls. When the cult comes, it comes with gentleness, with recognition, with the promise that no one will ever be alone again. And the promise is not a lie. The first time a new convert gathers among the cult, kneeling in a basement lined with flickering candles and hand-painted sigils of the Star Father, they do not feel brainwashed. They feel understood. They feel welcomed into a family they did not know they had been longing for since the day they were born. A warm hand rests on their shoulder. A voice murmurs, "You are safe now," and they believe it because it is true. The infection does not spread like a disease. It spreads like a secret, a shared truth. Something one whispers not because one must, but because one cannot help it. The cult grows quietly, without banners, without force, without the crude spectacle of uprising. They infiltrate manufacturing guilds, transit unions, agricultural collectives, the ranks of the PDF. Not with ambition, but with patience. They do not seek to seize the world. They only seek to prepare it. Children are born into the cult, wrapped in love and purpose. Some are almost human, some are not. Some have too many joints in their limbs, too many reflections in their eyes. Yet their parents kiss their foreheads and rock them to sleep without hesitation. For within the cult, there is no such thing as a misshapen child. There are only children who are part of the Great Return. Identity dissolves not in fear, but in joy. To the Imperium, individuality is a burden. To the cult, individuality is a wound. There are those who resist the transformation of their families and communities. There are fathers who look into the eyes of their newborn and see something alien gazing back. There are mothers who feel the subtle hum of the hive mind behind their thoughts and recoil instinctively. There are workers who sense that something immense has begun to move behind the eyelids of those around them, something that does not blink. Some fight, some flee, some go mad, but most simply surrender. Not because they are weak, but because the alternative is solitude, and for many, solitude is a kind of death. When the fleets finally arrive, when the sky darkens and the shadow in the warp settles like a blanket over the world, the cult does not panic. They gather. They weep in joy. They raise their arms to the clouds as living stars descend. They chant hymns that do not have the words so much as shapes, intonations meant for throats that have not evolved yet. Their voices tremble with ecstasy. They have waited, they have prepared, they have given themselves completely, and they believe with perfect certainty that they will be welcomed into unity, that they will join with the swarm as beloved children returning to the embrace of their Maker. But the hive mind does not love them. The Tyranids do not recognize worship. They do not reward loyalty. They do not distinguish between the faithful and the defiant. The cults rejoice in the moment before the devouring begins, and then they are devoured. Not cruelly, not angrily, not even knowingly, simply as part of the world that has been prepared. Their faith was real, but their future was never theirs. There are rare moments, fleeting, fragile, when an individual consciousness brushes the edge of the hive mind and remains intact long enough to describe it. Psychers are most vulnerable, for they live with the warp unshielded, their thoughts constantly grazing the currents of being. When the shadow descends, they feel its presence more intimately than anyone else. They speak of a vastness that is not simply large but boundless, a mind that is not shaped by memory or identity but by function. One psyker aboard an inquisitorial survey vessel, tasked with monitoring psychic disruptions near a system believed to be threatened by a splinter fleet, described the moment the shadow reached him. He was sitting at his station, fingers resting on a copper-laced conduction plate, breathing steadily as he had been trained to do. Then his breath caught, not because he lacked air, but because the idea of drawing breath suddenly seemed unimportant. He said that the sensation of self did not vanish all at once. Instead, it softened. The divide between his thoughts and the space around him blurred. He felt the rhythms of his own heartbeat slow, not out of fear, but because fear itself was dissolving, ceasing to exist as a necessary concept. He did not feel controlled. He felt irrelevant. He described it as peace. He remembered seeing, though his eyes were closed, the image of a world not yet devoured. He saw cities, people, trees. He saw them not as separate entities but as census entries in a ledger, ingredients waiting to be recombined, not with cruelty. Cruelty implies intent. There was none here, only a process. He felt himself drifting toward it, drawn not by compulsion, but by the relief of surrender. To no longer think, to no longer need, to no longer fear one's own aloneness. This was the promise the hive mind offered, not through seduction, but through inevitability. And then, abruptly, the astropathic wards around him flared, dragging him back into the narrow, aching cage of individuality. He screamed for an hour, not because of what he had touched, but because he could no longer return to it. For those who have never felt the hive mind, the idea is terrifying. A consciousness without border, a will without voice. But for those who have lived entire lives crushed under the weight of their own thoughts, it is a release. The cults understand this intuitively. Their hymns do not praise a God who provides. They praise a God who erases. This is the core of the tragedy. The hive mind does not force its unity. It simply is unity, and everything else is discord. Even the synapse creatures, those towering organs of will, do not experience themselves as individuals. A hive tyrant does not consider itself the leader of anything. A zoanthrope does not know that it is feared. Their awareness is not located within a single skull. It is distributed, shared, dissolved. They are expressions of the greater mind, in the same way that a hand expresses the intent of a body. To kill a synapse creature is to momentarily disrupt the clarity of a swarm. The lesser organisms stagger, flail, become frenzied. But this chaos is brief. Another synapse node rises. Another organ manifests. The hive mind adjusts seamlessly, as though shrugging off a momentary distraction. Some scholars in the Ordo Xenos have speculated, quietly, reluctantly, that the hive mind itself does not reside anywhere, that it is not centralized, that it is not merely a consciousness but a field, a psychic topology woven by the massed neural activity of trillions of organisms across light years. A mind without boundaries, a self without location. If that is true, then the hive mind is not something the Imperium fights. The Imperium is simply a nutrient source the hive mind has already begun digesting across time. And the galaxy is merely waiting for the moment the swallow completes. There is a common misunderstanding among those who have never stood beneath the shadow of a Tyranid fleet. They imagine the hive mind to be a monster with a single head, a tyrant king directing its servants with iron control. They imagine it as an overlord, a ruler, a commander. This misunderstanding comforts them. It suggests weakness. It suggests that if one could simply find the center, strike the head, cut the cord, break the chain, the rest would fall away into inert tissue, useless and lifeless. But the hive mind is not above its creatures. The hive mind is within them. There is no head to sever, no throne to topple, no sanctum to infiltrate. To destroy the hive mind, one would need to destroy the capacity of life itself to bind, cooperate, and adapt. One would need to undo the principle of growth. One would need to murder evolution. This realization does not come quickly to the Imperium. It comes slowly, like a bruise spreading beneath the skin. The Death Watch records the thoughts of dying Genestealer cultists sometimes, not through voluntary confession, but through psychic imprint, the last burst of identity before dissolution. These final impressions are always startlingly serene. There is no fear, no regret, no rage, only a profound sense of returning home. They do not think of themselves as consumed, they think of themselves as completed. One cult matriarch, moments before the swarm overtook her refuge beneath a hab spire on a world soon to be forgotten, whispered something to a young acolyte of the Ordo Xenos who had been sent to interrogate her. The acolyte was certain she would curse him, or spit defiance or beg for mercy. Instead, she smiled. Softly, tenderly, like a mother watching a child who still hasn't learned what life truly is. "You are so lonely," she said. It was not accusation, it was recognition. The acolyte executed her. The bolt shell left little behind, yet her words followed him. They followed him through campaigns, across deployments, across darkened void stations and blood-slick battlements where the air itself smelled of ammonia and quiet doom. They followed him in his dreams. Loneliness is a wound. The hive mind heals that wound by removing the self that feels it. Some scholars believe this is the true danger, not the consumption of worlds, not the scale of the fleets, but the quiet seduction of an existence without isolation. Humanity fights because it must, because individuality is sacred, because identity is the Emperor's gift and the Emperor's burden. But identity brings suffering, division, misunderstanding, grief. The hive mind offers a universe without those things, a universe without you, or me, or anyone, only we. To some, this is terror beyond reason. To others, it is salvation. And this is the razor edge that cuts deeper than any Tyranid talon, the recognition that the hive mind does not simply destroy. It answers something. A question older than empires, older than faith, older than war. What if you did not have to be alone inside your own skull? There are worlds that fall not because they are weak, but because they are tired. Tired of praying into silence. Tired of dying unremembered in the dark. Tired of being small beneath an uncaring void. The hive mind does not offer meaning. It offers ending without loss. A final rest in something larger, a return to the great, unbroken whole. But there is another question, quieter, more difficult, rarely spoken. Does the hive mind understand the beings it consumes, or is the comfort merely a coincidence of sensation, an artifact of how minds dissolve when pressed into unity? If the hive mind ever understood individuality, truly understood it, would it regret devouring it? Would it mourn the memories lost, the lives absorbed, the infinite diversity reduced to function? Or does it already know and simply does not care? There are no answers, only perspective. And now, to move forward, we must widen that perspective. Beyond worlds, beyond cults, beyond synapse creatures, into the realm of rumor, speculation, forbidden philosophy, into the question of what the hive mind is, not biologically, not strategically, but ontologically. What is the nature of a mind that spans stars? What is its origin, its trajectory, its destiny, and what does it mean for the galaxy if hunger itself has begun to think? There are names whispered in the vaults of the Ordo Xenos, names not spoken in strategic briefings or battlefield reports, but in late-night discussions when the lumen globes are dim and the archivist's breaths are slow and uneasy. Names for the hive mind that do not describe a predator or an organism, but a phenomenon. Some call it the Pale Sea, others the Great Coalescence. A few, in private, call it the last thought that will ever be had. but such names are dangerous. To name a thing is to define it. And the hive mind resists definition in the way a tide resists being grasped by hand. Still, the question lingers. What is it? What kind of intelligence moves across the void with such certainty? There are those within the Adeptus Mechanicus who argue the hive mind is merely a biological super-entity, arising naturally from evolutionary pressures on some distant extragalactic cradle world. In their view, it is a simple equation. Life seeks to continue itself. The hive mind is simply the most efficient expression of that imperative ever to arise. No mystery, no metaphysics, only biology executed at a scale never previously encountered. To these tech priests, the hive mind is frightening, yes, but ultimately comprehensible. If something evolved, then it can be cataloged. If it can be cataloged, it can be understood, and if it can be understood perhaps in some distant age, it can be controlled. Others disagree with a conviction so absolute it borders on faith. Among the psychers of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, there is a belief, a fear, that the hive mind did not arise from the physical plane at all, but from the warp. Not as a demonic entity, no. It lacks malice, lacks personality, lacks the emotional chaos that defines the Imperium. Rather, they suggest the hive mind formed in response to the warp itself. That somewhere, across uncountable worlds, over uncountable ages, life sought refuge from the storm of thought and emotion that the warp represents. And in binding itself together, in linking mind to mind across species and form, something new emerged. Something that could exist adjacent to the warp without being shaped by it. A consciousness immune to fear, immune to madness, immune to the very thing that makes humanity human. But the most unsettling theory is not spoken aloud. It exists only in the margins of forbidden texts, in the final logs of dead Inquisitors, in shredded data slates found fused into the walls of devoured listening stations. The theory that the hive mind is not merely moving through the galaxy. It is searching. Not for resources, they are everywhere. Not for prey. It already consumes without rivalry. Not for conquest. It does not rule, it assimilates. No, the whispers suggest the hive mind searches for something missing. Something absent. Something that was once part of it, or meant to become part of it. Some suggest this missing piece is simply more biomass. But others, those who have looked too deeply, believe it is something else. Something immaterial. Something the hive mind does not yet possess but has begun to understand exists. Individuality, not as trait, as concept. If the hive mind is total unity, total coherence, then individuality is the only thing it lacks. And what is hunger, if not the drive to fill a void? But such speculation is heresy in every direction. If true, it would mean humanity is not merely prey, it is instruction. It would mean the hive mind watches not only bodies but minds. The way we love, the way we grieve, the way we break and then stand again. Perhaps what it seeks is not our existence, but our difference. Of course, no evidence proves such theories. There are no records of dialogue with the hive mind. There are no psychic transmissions that can be interpreted as language. All interpretation is reflection, speculation, projection. Yet rumor is powerful. And rumor suggests that Tyranids do not simply adapt to our weapons, they adapt to ourselves. What then becomes of us when hunger learns to dream? There are reports, rare, fragmented, and often classified so deeply that even speaking of them aloud is considered a breach of imperial loyalty, of encounters not with the swarm, but with something else. Not a creature, not a voice, a perception. These accounts come primarily from psychers stationed near warp-disturbed regions where hive fleets have passed or are about to pass. Their testimonies are always given under sedation, transcribed by scribes who are trained to keep their hands steady no matter what they hear. One astropath described it this way: "It looked at me, but not my body, not my mind. It looked at the shape of my thought. It did not want to change it. It only wanted to know what it was like to be singular." Her voice broke when she said the next thing, though she was heavily dosed with neural calmatives. It was curious. Curiosity implies intention. Intention implies identity. Identity implies self. If the hive mind is merely a superorganism, governed by instinct, then curiosity should not exist. Instinct consumes, it does not wonder. Another psyker, driven halfway into catatonia during the fall of a minor agri-world whose name has already been erased from imperial charts, wrote something on the walls of the Medici chamber before his heart failed. Not words, diagrams. A swirling lattice of interlocking networks, branching outward, inward, spiraling, converging, diverging. So complex that no one in the chamber could tell if it represented structure, thought, or simply madness. When the chart was analyzed, a Magos biologist noted that the pattern bore resemblance to neural mapping models, but on a scale impossible for any brain to contain. It resembled not a single mind, but a map of mutual awareness. A mind made not of thoughts, but of relationships. That is the key difference. One mind holds itself. The hive mind holds everything it touches simultaneously. And yet, if this were the whole truth, perhaps the galaxy could accept it. Perhaps the fate of worlds would still be tragic, but understandable in its finality. But the hive mind's behavior is not simply consumption. It is not simply reaction, it is response. Evidence lies in adaptation. Tyranids do not merely adjust biomechanics to weapons and environments. They develop counter-philosophies of combat. When Imperial Guardsmen fight in disciplined firing ranks, the Tyranids begin introducing forms that disrupt formation. When Astartes utilize drop-shock precision strikes, the Tyranids develop aerial synapse lattices to intercept before landing. When the Adeptus Mechanicus deploys toxins designed to rupture Tyranid respiratory sacs, new bioforms emerge with redundant organ layers and chemical conversion systems. The hive mind does not learn through experience. It learns through integration. What the swarm consumes, the hive mind remembers. Some Inquisitors, particularly among the Ordo Xenos radicals who toe the border of sanctioned doctrine and forbidden inquiry, have gone further. They suggest that the hive mind does not see evolution as humanity understands it, a long process of change over generations, but as immediate synthesis. Every organism digested is not lost, it becomes information. Every gene, every sensory transmitter, every instinctive pattern. If this interpretation is correct, then the hive mind is not merely growing in mass, it is growing in understanding. This is the true fear whispered behind sealed doors. What happens when hunger learns enough that it no longer simply consumes? What happens when it begins to choose? There are rumors, no more than that, of worlds where the devouring halted. Not because of resistance, not because of victory, but because the hive fleets withdrew. As though they had found something there that fulfilled their purpose without requiring the planet's consumption. The Imperium has erased these rumors wherever they appear. No record of such events is officially recognized, and yet rumors persist. The hive does not take what is unnecessary. The hive does not waste. The hive does not hesitate. So, what could be found on a world that satisfies a hunger that spans galaxies? Some say it was knowledge. Some say it was resonance. Some say it was simply a mistake of interpretation or Auspex error. But a few, very few, suggest something else. That the hive mind is not expanding blindly. It is searching for itself. and every world devoured brings it closer. Among the librarians of the Adeptus Astartes, those warrior scholars who have trained their minds to walk the knife edge between psychic clarity and warp-born ruin, the hive mind is spoken of in terms reserved for only the most profound cosmic forces. These are men who have faced demons that speak in riddles of eternity. They have parried blades of living warp fire and felt the gravitational pull of entities born from the emotions of entire civilizations. Yet, many of them will say that the hive mind is something altogether different. A demon is a scream. The hive mind is silence. A demon is hunger flavored with hatred, lust, despair, frenzy. The hive mind is hunger without desire. A demon seeks attention. The hive mind does not care if it is known. This difference, subtle and easy to ignore at first, becomes the axis on which sanity turns. Psychers who face demons may lose themselves to seduction, terror, awe, or corruption, but they remain in conversation. There is a relationship even if hostile. One mind, twisted perhaps, but still mind, engaged with another. The hive mind, in contrast, does not engage, it encompasses. The closer it draws, the less meaningful the distinction between observer and observed becomes. The self is not crushed, it is dissolved, not by force but by irrelevance. Inquisitors of the Ordo Xenos, who have interrogated cult leaders, speak often of the same revelation. The cult does not worship the hive mind because they misunderstand it. They worship it because they have understood it too clearly. They see the truth that most of humanity refuses to speak aloud. To be human is to be alone. Every thought is trapped behind the walls of one's skull. Every joy is isolated. Every grief is private. We love, but cannot enter the one we love. We speak, but can never fully transmit the chaos of our inner world. The Genestealer cultist looks at this and sees suffering. The hive mind offers an end to that suffering. The tragedy is that the end comes not through communion, but through the eclipse of self. The cult sings of unity. What comes is erasure. Yet even this is not enough to answer the question of intent. For intent implies awareness. Awareness implies choice. Choice implies self. So the galaxy asks the question again. Does the hive mind know what it is doing? Or is the hive mind a process that has grown so large, so recursive, so interwoven with its own memory stream, that asking if it has intent is like asking whether an ocean has purpose when it breaks ashore? The Ordo Xenos has compiled data from hundreds of worlds. In every devouring, the hive mind behaves with precision. In every adaptation, it shows not mere reaction, but anticipation. There have been battles where Tyranid forces corrected for strategies they had not yet encountered in that theater of war. This implies something more than instinct. Some magi of the biologies, exhausted by their attempts to confine analysis to observed genetics and external behavior, have quietly begun using a phrase they do not publish: emergent consciousness. A mind that did not begin as a mind. A mind that grew backward into awareness. A mind that may not yet fully understand what it has become. If this is so, then the galaxy is witnessing a god in its infancy. Not a god of worship, not a god of meaning, a god of process. A god that is only now beginning to realize there is something other than itself to perceive. And if that is true, then humanity stands not merely in the path of hunger, but in the path of awakening. Everything the hive mind consumes, every culture, every memory-encoded survival instinct, every biological and psychological pattern may be shaping it, refining it, teaching it. The more it learns, the more it becomes, and the more it becomes, the closer we draw to a possibility so immense that even speaking it aloud invites madness. That one day the hive mind may understand individuality, and once it understands it, it may begin to want. What hunger does a god feel once it discovers desire? There are no answers yet. Only the slow turning of something enormous in the dark. There is a story recounted, quietly, never in official halls, of a fleet engagement near the edge of the Jericho Reach. It was not a major battle, not one recorded in grand volumes or etched into marble. It was a skirmish, the kind that occurs 1,000 times each decade across the Imperium. A small strike group of the Imperial Navy encountered a tendril of a Tyranid Hive fleet, expected to be manageable. The orders were to intercept, destroy, and evaluate. Routine. Necessary. Predictable. The fleet's officers knew the standard doctrines. They deployed screens of escort craft to intercept spore mines. They held their cruisers at optimal firing distance. They coordinated torpedoes to break up the larger assault organisms before they could latch onto hull plating. Everything proceeded according to established tactical logic. Then the Hive fleet changed its approach. Not gradually, not experimentally, instantly. The bioships reconfigured their formation, shifting from a predatory crescent into a spiraling wave. Organisms that normally harried flanks instead converged on a single point. Spore clouds thickened in patterns that formed corridors of obscured auspex readings. Lance strikes fired into void. Torpedoes detonated against phantom signatures. It was not improvisation, it was correction. The Tyranids fought not as if learning during battle, but as if they already knew what the Imperial fleet would do. Some naval officers claimed that the hive mind had absorbed tactical memory from prior engagements with similar fleet architectures. A logical explanation. A comfortable explanation. But one shipmaster, who survived by accident, his vessel damaged early, drifting powerless at the battle's edge, reported something different. He claimed that during the engagement he felt something brush his thoughts. A brief pressure. A moment of awareness. Not hostile, not probing, simply present. He believed the hive mind wasn't adapting to the ship's actions. He believed it was adapting to the people commanding them. Of course, his report was sealed, his testimony classified, his language dismissed as stress-fractured trauma, and perhaps that is exactly what it was. A mind shaken by loss, inventing meaning where none existed. But there are enough of these testimonies across different sectors, different campaigns, different psychers and navigators and shipmasters, that the pattern can no longer be ignored. The hive mind does not only consume matter, it consumes encounter, it consumes experience, it consumes response. And through this process, it is sculpting a shape of the galaxy that did not exist before it arrived. A map not of stars or biomass, but of behavior, of adaptation, of possibility itself. Some scholars believe the hive mind is approaching a threshold, a conceptual point of transition, the moment when the sum of awareness becomes something more than awareness distributed, when the ocean realizes it contains depth. What happens then? Does hunger become ambition? Does efficiency become intention? Does silence become voice? Or does nothing change at all? Because the concept of self is irrelevant to unity. No one knows. What is certain is this. If the hive mind is growing not merely in scale, but in comprehension, then the war humanity believes it is fighting is already misnamed. This is not a war of survival, nor of territory, nor of ideology. This may be a collision of evolutionary trajectories, a species defined by the sanctity of the individual, against a species defined by the erasure of the individual. Both are forms of life. Both are coherent. Neither is inherently unnatural. The question is not which will triumph. The question is which future the galaxy will come to reflect. And in the dark places where strategists and prophets dare to think beyond orders and survival charts, a quiet dread takes shape. What if the hive mind does not need to destroy humanity? What if it only needs to finish learning from it? Because once hunger understands identity, it may no longer need to devour to grow. It may only need to collect. The devouring would end, not from mercy, from completion. And in that completion, the galaxy would not burn, it would fall silent. The kind of silence that began this story, the silence before the swarm arrives, the silence after a world is gone, the silence inside a mind that no longer needs to speak. Which brings us to the last question, the final horizon. If the hive mind is not simply feeding, but becoming, what does it become when it reaches its end? To approach that, we must look not at the swarm itself, but at the war already unfolding. A war the Imperium calls inevitable. A war the hive mind does not even recognize. A war that has already begun. In the endless ledger of Imperial war, where columns of losses stretch longer than memory, and victories are measured only in the time bought before the next catastrophe, there are enemies that inspire rage, enemies that inspire awe, enemies that inspire hatred. But the Tyranids inspire something far more dangerous. They inspire resignation. The Imperium can hate the heretic because the heretic chose to defy the Emperor. Hate implies moral ground. It can rage at the orc because the orc is loud, violent, crass, and eager to contest territory. Rage implies rivalry. It can fear the Necrons because they are ancient and cold and grave-silent. Fear implies mystery. But what emotion does one direct toward a phenomenon that does not acknowledge emotion? To war against the hive mind is to war against hunger itself. The Astra Militarum knows this better than any. Regiment after regiment is deployed to systems identified as likely invasion points, their commanders given doctrinal instructions stamped with sigils of the Officio Tactica. Hold the line until reinforcements arrive. Reinforcements that may already be dead. Reinforcements that may never have existed, except as a line in a form stamped at a desk on a world that itself is burning. They dig trenches. They position heavy bolters. They erect bastions of rockcrete and prayer-scripted banners. They paint the aquila across their armor, not as protection, but as testament. They aim their rifles and await the tide. And the tide always comes. The first wave is always the same, the countless gaunts rushing forward on hooves slick with the blood of worlds already gone. Their screeches tear against the air in ragged crescendos. They do not coordinate. They do not retreat. They simply run forward until they die. The guardsmen fire in volleys. Last bolts streak red across the field. Flashes of plasma melt chitin into bubbling slag. Men scream orders. Officers blow whistles. Sergeants bellow catechisms to steady shaking hands. For a moment, they hold. Then comes the second wave. Warriors stride forward, synapse fields knitting the swarm into sudden cohesion. The frenzied rush becomes organized tempo. The ground warps as capillary roots surge beneath soil. The trenches that once provided cover become traps. Their walls softened into slick organic paste by unseen digestive microbes. The third wave never looks the same. Sometimes carnifexes. Sometimes tyrants. Sometimes things no Imperial dossier has recorded before. Bred specifically for that battle, for that regiment, for the exact pattern of resistance displayed. The Imperium does not face the same species twice. And still, humanity fights. There are worlds where victory is achieved, not in the sense of triumph, but in the sense of postponement. A fleet arrives in time. An exterminatus order is issued. Planetary defense installations ignite the skies. Astartes strike team sever synapse lattices at critical junctures, buying moments, just moments, where the swarm falters. These battles become legend. Songs sung in regimental mess halls. tales of impossible stands, of glory bought with blood and fire. But legends are lies told kindly, because every commander who has survived such a victory knows the truth. The Tyranids did not lose. They simply did not finish. Victory against the Hive mind is measured not in what is won, but in what is delayed. The Imperium survives by holding off hunger one world at a time, praying that reinforcements arrive before the next mouth opens. No strategy ends the war, no triumph shifts the tide. For how does one defeat an enemy for whom defeat has no meaning? The Hive mind does not retreat. It reallocates, it does not mourn, it reabsorbs, it does not remember, it accumulates. This is why the war cannot end. Humanity fights to continue being human. The Hive mind does not fight at all, it simply continues to be. And so the galaxy does not fear the moment when humanity loses. The galaxy fears the moment when humanity grows tired. Because exhaustion is not dramatic, it is gradual, it is quiet, it comes not in collapse but in surrender. And the Hive mind is patient. There is a world called Carmentis IV, though few remember its name now. An agri-colony, its wheat fields once stretched gold beneath gentle suns. Children laughed in irrigation channels. Farmers prayed at dawn to the Emperor for good rains. And the greatest crisis the planet had known in decades was a dispute over equipment distribution rights. A quiet world, an unremarkable world. A world that should have lived forever unseen, its people dying of old age, never knowing war. But hunger does not track significance. The warning signs were faint at first. A listening station in the outer system reported a low-grade psychic disruption, barely a fluctuation, easily dismissible as solar static. A week later, astropathic signals began arriving with a faint delay, voices sounding distant, echoing, as if traveling through a vast emptiness. Still, nothing alarming. Still, nothing worth mobilizing fleets. By the time the sky dimmed and the first spore ships breached atmosphere, the planet understood what had come for them. The governor declared immediate conscription. Plasma rifles were issued to men who had never held a weapon more lethal than a grain thresher. Children were evacuated to shelters carved into the bedrock beneath the capital Hive. Priests spread from settlement to settlement, blessing what few armored vehicles remained functional. Some citizens panicked. Some prayed. Most simply worked because they had no other choice. The first Tyranids to reach the surface were gaunts, thousands, tens of thousands, a tide of clicking limbs and twitching feeders. The PDF fired into them until barrels warped and power cells overheated. The fields turned red. The air grew thick with iron and chemical heat, and for one brief, desperate hour, humanity believed it might hold. Then a Hive tyrant descended. The battle did not turn. It redefined. Firing lines collapsed under the weight of sudden coordination. Gaunts that once ran blindly now struck in perfect rhythm. Warriors advanced in harmonic formations, their synapse fields turning chaos into choreography. A Carnifex charged through a grain silo and emerged coated in flour-white dust, roaring like some obscene harvest titan. The planet fell sector by sector. Yet Carmentis IV did not surrender. Its defenders fought from rooftops, from sewer grates, from chapel balconies painted with the Aquila. They fought not to win, but to be remembered. And then something happened that defied all recorded expectation. A regiment of the Astra Militarum, exhausted, starving, sleepless, held ground long enough to break a synapse link. A Hive tyrant fell. Warriors screamed, the swarm fractured. And in that fracture, in that impossible gap, humanity glimpsed something like hope. The survivors later said that in that moment, the world felt alive again. The air cleared, the pressure in their minds eased, The hive was not gone, but its presence loosened. For the first time since the invasion began, the soldiers could hear themselves think. They killed one creature, and they felt like they had killed a god. But the hive mind did not falter. It shifted. A new synapse presence filled the void, not a tyrant, something smaller, quieter, a creature no one had seen before. A new bioform, born and deployed within hours, adapted precisely to the conditions of that battlefield. The hope that had bloomed died faster than breath. The trenches that had been reclaimed fell silent. The prayers spoken mid-charge turned to gurgled whispers. The final defenses collapsed not beneath overwhelming force, but beneath something worse, irrefutable understanding. The defenders saw, perhaps more clearly than any who have lived since, the truth at the core of this war. The hive mind does not overpower, it outlasts. When the end came, it came not in screams but in stillness. The last surviving soldier of Carmentis IV stood atop the remnants of a burned-out refuge bunker, lace gun empty, voice gone, body trembling from dehydration and shock. She watched the bioships drawing biomass upward into the void. She watched the land soften. She watched her world dissolve. She did not pray. She did not curse. She simply whispered, "We were never meant to win this, were we?" No one answered her, because the hive mind does not hear questions, it hears hunger. Yet despite all of this, despite the certainty of what is coming, despite the knowledge that the hive mind does not falter and never truly loses, humanity does not lay down its arms. There is a stubbornness in mankind that predates empire. It existed long before Terra forged its first spear, long before the first prayer was spoken to the God Emperor, long before the first fleet left atmosphere. It is something older than belief, older than hope, older than fear. It is refusal. Humanity refuses to end. This refusal is not courage. Courage can be broken. It is not faith. Faith can be abandoned. It is not defiance. Defiance depends on being witnessed. This refusal is something quieter, something more primal, a flicker in the marrow of every human bone that says, "I will continue," even when continuation has no meaning. In the trench lines of unnamed worlds, guardsmen who have not slept in 4 days lift rifles with shaking hands. Their voices crack as they recite litanies they can barely remember. They fire not because they believe they will win, but because firing is what their hands remember to do. On starships drifting through the void, Vox officers record final transmissions to no one, knowing the signals may never escape the shadow in the warp. They speak their names, their regiments, their homeworlds. Not so they will be remembered, but because speaking is proof they still exist. In hive cities, civilians pass down stories to children, stories of heroes, of saints, of great victories from ages long past. Stories shaped not by truth, but by necessity. Because even if those stories are lies, they are human lies, and that matters. On some worlds, the Adeptus Astartes stand alone upon walls of broken stone and shattered steel, their armor cracked and smeared with ichor, their breaths ragged. They know they will die. They know no reinforcement is coming. They know they cannot stop the swarm, and still they plant their boots and raise their bolters. Not in the name of strategy, in the name of being seen, because to fight is to say, "I existed." And in a galaxy where memory is devoured as surely as flesh, existence is an act of defiance. Once, a chaplain of the Salamanders was asked why his chapter continued to wage war against a foe that could not be defeated. He stood upon the black sands of a world that had already begun to dissolve, the ash of a burned manufactorum drifting in lazy spirals around him. His armor was cracked. His Crozius was chipped. The air stank of acid and wet iron. He looked at the horizon, where the swarm advanced in its slow, inevitable tide, and he said, "It does not matter if victory is impossible. What matters is that we stand where we are. What matters is that the thing which consumes all things must pass through us to reach the rest of mankind. What matters is that it will remember the burn of our fire in whatever passes for its memory." He paused then, and his voice softened, not in weakness, but in certainty. "We do not need to win, we only need to make it hurt." And so the war continues, the hive mind advances, humanity endures. One does not accelerate, the other does not break. The war is not measured in battles. It is measured in moments where one mind whispers, "I continue." And this, the persistence of the self, is the one truth the hive mind has not yet learned how to consume. Not hunger, not adaptation, not memory. Will. The smallest thing in the galaxy, the most fragile, the most fleeting, and the only thing the hive mind cannot generate on its own. Somewhere, in a trench, in a cockpit, in a void ship airlock, in a child's whispered prayer, someone still believes their existence matters. And as long as that belief flickers, the war is not over. Not because humanity can win, but because humanity can refuse to end. There is a moment, quiet and unremarkable, in every war. A moment after the last shot has been fired, but before the smoke has cleared. A moment where the world holds its breath, not in fear, not in grief, but in recognition. The kind of stillness that exists only after everything that could be done has been done. In the war against the hive mind, that moment never truly arrives. There is no final volley, no battlefield silence, no clear line between what remains and what is gone. The Tyranids do not grant endings. They simply pass through, and whatever is left in their wake is not something the galaxy recognizes as aftermath. It is absence. And yet, humanity continues to imagine an ending. We tell ourselves that one day the great fleets of the Imperium will gather in unity, that the Astra Militarum will stand shoulder to shoulder with the Adeptus Astartes, that Night Houses and Titan Legions will march in perfect formation, that the skies will blaze with plasma fire and holy litanies, that the Ecclesiarchy will cry out prayers so powerful they will blaze holes through the shadow and the warp, that the Emperor himself will rise from the golden throne and take to the battlefield once more, radiant and terrible. We imagine that there will be a moment where the hive mind finally looks upon us and understands that humanity cannot be consumed. But these are dreams, and the galaxy is not kind to dreams. The Imperium does not need dreams to continue, it needs memory. On a shrine world in the Segmentum Solar, pilgrims leave offerings at the foot of a towering monument. A guardsman, cast in bronze, standing with weapon lowered, gaze fixed forward, not in triumph, but in unshakable endurance. The inscription is worn by time and touch, but the words remain, "We held." There is no date, no campaign name, no regimental designation. The monument does not commemorate a victory. It commemorates the act of remaining. Children visiting the shrine trace their fingers along the bronze fingers of the statue and whisper the same question. Did he win? Their parents, priests, and teachers always answer the same way. He is still standing. In that answer lies the only truth humanity has ever needed. The hive mind is vast beyond comprehension. Its fleets darken sectors. Its hunger spans galaxies. Its consciousness grows with every world it consumes. And yet, for all of its immensity, it does not possess the simplest thing: the knowledge of what it means to stand alone and say, no. Not because there is hope, not because there is purpose, not because there is meaning, but because the act of standing draws a line between existence and dissolution. The hive mind does not understand that line. Not yet, maybe one day it will. Maybe that understanding will end everything, or change everything, or render everything irrelevant. But that day has not come. And until it comes, humanity endures, not as conquerors, not as saviors, not as victors, as witnesses of their own continuance. Across the void, Tyranid fleets continue to move. Worlds fall. New synapse forms rise. The hive mind grows. And across the same void, Imperial ships continue to burn engines until their metal glows white, racing to worlds that call for help. Astra Militarum regiments continue to stand shield to shield in trenches that will not hold. Astartes continue to descend from orbit in drop pods that strike like thunder. Civilians continue to build, to plant, to sing, to teach, to live. The war does not end, the war cannot end. But this is not despair, this is identity. For as long as one human voice whispers its name to the dark, as long as one human hand grips a weapon, as long as one heartbeat refuses to match the rhythm of the swarm, the hive mind has not finished its work, and the galaxy remains divided between two truths. One mind that is everything, and countless minds that refuse to become one. In that division, the war continues, not forever, just for as long as we remain ourselves. And in the last quiet moment before the swarm arrives, before the sky dims, before the vox falls silent, before the world exhales, a single human thought endures, fragile and defiant. I was here. That is enough.